So I wanted to mention during the message time that Pastor Doug is not here today. He will not be here for a couple of weeks. If you guys can be praying for Doug, he went in and had full knee replacement surgery, and now he is recovering. I think it would have been fun to film him on medication, but I was told that we could not do that. Yeah, his text messages are interesting. Let's just say that. Donna should take his phone from him. But he will be back in a couple of weeks, so if you're wondering where Doug is, that's where he's at. Just be praying for him. We're going to continue in our series called The Upside Down, where we're looking at the countercultural, kind of upside-down way that Jesus talks about how his kingdom actually works. And we've gone through a couple of topics. So we began with this idea of happiness or joy, deep-seated joy, is more about a who than a what. Like, you know, it's the people that are in your life, not all the things that you acquire. And then a couple of weeks ago, we said God's kingdom is not just about what we do, it's about who we are internally. So it's not all the things that we do, that God's kingdom is more concerned about who you are. Then last week, Pastor Joseph said that God's kingdom is learning to love those who have hurt us. That's a very, very difficult message to put into place. As we begin today, though, I want to start with this word right here. Everybody knows what a loophole is, right? And when I say loophole, I'm just curious. What comes to mind? You can go ahead. What comes to mind when you see the word loophole? Taxes, right? That's at the top of the list, right? Yeah, taxes. I'm looking for a loophole. How do I convince the IRS that my dog Hershey really is a dependent? Like, those are there. Maybe you thought of, that one friend that always seems to forget his wallet when you go out to eat. And it's like, that's his loophole, or you kind of have the picture of all the lawyers gathered around, huddled around, looking for that one loophole that can get their client off the hook, or that fine print that nobody reads. All those loopholes are for the company. They never work in your advantage, right? But here's the thing. Looking for loopholes is not something that we have to teach, right? You never sit down with your children and say, hey, I need to teach you how to look for loopholes and how to get around the system. It's like something that you just learn naturally. Like when you were a kid, you were trying to convince, your mom and dad, they send you and they say, hey, go clean your room. And you already had a loophole because technically under your bed or in your closet was not in your room. So you didn't have to clean that, right? Or if they said, eat all your vegetables, your loophole was ketchup comes from tomatoes. Tomatoes are a vegetable. I ate my vegetables, right? We don't have to be told how to look for loopholes. And then you get a little bit older, you become a teenager, and mom and dad say, be home by 10. And you're like, aha, I've got you, because you never clarified 10 p.m. So technically, I am home 7 hours early, right? Loopholes. We encounter them, we look for them, there's always looking for those in our advantage. But when religious people exploit a loophole, we have a term for that. And it's a little bit different. And actually, Jesus has the exact same term that he calls them. You know what it is? Hypocrites. These are the people looking for the loopholes. And here's the interesting thing. If you have ever rolled your eyes at a religious hypocrite, or you just don't like religious hypocrites, I've got some news for you. You and Jesus have something in common. You never even thought about that. It's like, I have something in common with Jesus? Yes, because Jesus did not like hypocrisy. He did not like hypocrites. So what exactly is hypocrisy? Well, let's define it, at least how we're going to use it today. Hypocrisy is appearing good rather than actually being good. So you want to appear that you're good or look good rather than actually being good. And you can throw all kinds of things in that category. Do what I say, not what I do. Right? Why do you say that? Because the things I say make me look good, not necessarily what I do. It's wearing a mask. It's presenting one version of ourselves to the public world and a very different version of ourselves in private. Now, why is hypocrisy such a big deal? There's probably tons and tons and tons of reasons. But let me just give you a couple as I was thinking about them. The first thing that I thought of is hypocrisy. It damages relationships. And it kind of destroys trust. Think about the last time that someone was close to you, you caught them in a lie. Maybe been last night. I don't know. What did that do? How did it make you feel? Not great, right? Imagine finding out that someone's entire life that they had presented to you was a lie. How would that make you feel? Right? It would destroy trust, and it would greatly damage, if not completely destroy, a relationship. When my wife and I, when we lived in Georgia, we had termites. Anybody here ever had termites? Anybody? Okay, yeah. We now have termite contracts. I understand why we have those now. But we had termites. And by the time we found we had termites, it was really, really bad. This is what hypocrisy is kind of like. It's kind of like termites to a relationship. It just eats away at it, and it eats away at it, and it eats away at it to the point that it is no longer structurally sound. And then everything has to be rebuilt. Several years ago, I was talking with a friend, and he was talking about his dad, and his dad was kind of a pillar in his church. And I knew his dad, and we were talking about his dad, and what he began to describe to me was something that I never saw, never got to experience. He said, everyone looked up at my dad, but at home, he was an entirely different person. And he began to talk about how angry he was, how he would punch holes in the wall, and how manipulative he was, how cruel that he would be to his mom. And then he said something that has really marked him heavily. He said, I didn't just lose trust in my dad. I lost trust in the whole idea of faith. This is the result of hypocrisy, right? The real danger is it doesn't just damage one relationship, it can poison everything that it touches. I meet fairly regularly with a group of guys who have given up on church for whatever, various reasons, different things. Some have gone as far as, I'm an atheist and different things. But I will tell you, in knowing them and knowing their stories and having a friendship with them, every single one of them, I'm not saying that this is the common denominator, I'm just saying that in their lives, every single one of them have encountered a hypocritical Christian. And that influenced their decision to either walk away from church or I don't want to believe in a God. Hypocrisy does some real damage, right? Second thing, hypocrisy creates a fake version of ourselves. Here's something scary to think about. If you pretend to be someone you're not for long enough, you might forget who you really are. Let me say that again. If you pretend to be someone you are not for long enough, you might just forget who you actually are. I love social media as good as the next person. Instagram. How many of you love Instagram filters? They're great. I love Instagram filters. So I kind of like them for landscape, so you can make fall look like fall. It just looks awesome, right? But people also like the filters on themselves. You ever played with those that make you not look like you're 55 years old and you look young again and takes away all the wrinkles, Or the ones that give you back hair. Am I the only one that have played with these? Right, a little touch up here, a little smoothing out there. But what happens if we actually start believing that's what we look like? Right? Hypocrites, they do the same thing, they just do it with their personality. Right? They create a perfect, polished version of themselves that they want the world to see. And the longer that we maintain that facade, the more disconnected we become of who we really are. And if you believe you are something, how can God come in and do something different when you don't even believe there's anything that needs to be changed? You follow me? Let me tell you, there is nothing more exhausting than trying to be someone that you're not all the time. But the third thing about hypocrisy, it leads to internal conflict and stress. Right? Living a double life isn't just exhausting, it is stressful. One of the things I always tried to do was impress my kids with feats of strength. It's just something I'm teasing. So we had a pool, And when my kids were little, what I would do, and my boys were fascinated by this, we had like this ball. It wasn't a big ball, it was about this big. And I would take this ball and I would push it down underneath the pool, and I would see how long I could hold it there. And then my kids were always like struggling to do that. You ever done that? You ever tried to hold a ball down below the water in a pool? You can't do that forever. I mean, it's pretty easy at first, but eventually all of that pressure just keeps pushing back on you and pushing back on you and pushing back on you. And eventually what happens? Right? The ball comes flying out. When we're constantly trying to reconcile our public image with our private reality, there's a war that goes on inside, and it's kind of like pushing that ball underneath the water. And we can do it for a little while, but then we start living with the fear and the pressure. What happens when the ball pops out? Because it's going to happen. What happens when everyone finds out who I really am? What happens when everybody finds out that I'm not the perfect dad that they think that I am? Early this year, I was talking with a guy, and he admitted to me that he had been living a double life for years. And on Sundays, he was the picture-perfect family man. Came in, wife, kids, had everything all together. But during the week, he was neck deep in multiple ongoing affairs, and he had a gambling addiction. And this is what he told me when we were sitting and we were talking. He said, I felt like I was dying inside. I woke up every day wondering, is this the day that I get found out? Hypocrisy, it does this to us. Like, it brings a tremendous amount of conflict and a tremendous amount of stress, and that is not a way to live. You will never experience what Jesus talks about, life and life to the full, if that is what you are doing. So when we talk about hypocrisy, we're not just talking about breaking the rules or finding loopholes. We're talking about hypocrisy damages relationships. It disconnects us from our true self, and it fills us with conflict and stress. I don't want any of this. I don't know that you do either. So the good news is, Jesus says, hey, there's a way out of this. So if you got a Bible or if you got a Bible app, you can go to Matthew. We're in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to go to chapter 6 now. We just wrapped up chapter 5. We're going to go to chapter 6 where Jesus begins to give us some hope. Not only does he talk about hypocrisy, but he shows us a better way, the kingdom way, and it does run contrary to what we would think. But I don't want this. I want life, and Jesus says, hey, you can have life, but first we got to deal with this issue. So Matthew chapter 6, beginning with verse 1, he tells them, watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others. Now, we could pause. We could build a whole message based on this. For you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. Like, you can do that, but you'll lose it. Rather, when you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do. So Jesus is calling them out now. Blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. Now, I don't know that you guys are doing that when you do good deeds, blowing trumpets. If you do, we got to have a whole other discussion. But this is apparently something that they would do, to call attention to themselves. And I think this is a really good place as we begin to ask a very important question, because Jesus is going to ask a question, but he says the answer is kind of obvious, and then he's going to deal with the obvious answer. The question is, why do we do this? You ever thought about it? All of us have hypocrisy. Why do you do it? Well, Jesus is beginning to point out right here why we do it. We all want to be seen as good people. Everybody in this room. Nobody here wants to be seen as a bad person. Everybody here wants to be seen as a good person. And so we begin to do these things. And what's the motivation? I want to be seen. I want to be seen as good. I want to be seen as good. Now, let's be honest for a second, though. Have you ever done something good and immediately wanted to tell somebody that you did something good? How many of you have done that? The rest of you are liars. Lying in church. Man, I don't know about you people. You do something good. Like you're afraid, I can't say that now, I'll be a hypocrite. No, I'm just talking like legit. You do something good. Like you go wrap presents for Hope Match, or you make donations to Hope Match, and you're like, man, I want to tell somebody what I did. Like we all do that, right? You do something good. You do something good for your kids, right? All of us, we're hardwired to want to tell someone, and we're hardwired to kind of want the approval. Like, man, way to go. Good thing you did that. It's like we got this inner 5-year-old that's saying, look what I did. Look what I did. Dad, look what I did. Look what I, like, we're hardwired this way. And there is nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be seen as good. There's nothing wrong with that. Right? We start doing right things. But here's where the problem comes. When we start doing right things for the wrong reasons or for the wrong motivation. So we're doing right things, but the motivation really is to be seen doing right things. That's the trap. That's where things can go wrong. I mean, helping others is great, but if helping others for you is just a photo op, something's gone wrong. I was scrolling last week. I'll say on a social platform so you can't even track down the person that I'm about to say anonymously. And in the feed was yet another selfie of them helping out at a soup kitchen. And the caption read, and I've changed the wording on this so you can't track it down. Feeling blessed to serve others today, #humbled, #making a difference. Now, nothing wrong with that post. Nothing wrong with it at all. Volunteering is fantastic. The problem is this is about the 100th post I've seen. And this person is trying to build a brand. You say, well, Clay, that's being kind of judgmental. No, they actually have written blog articles and they have YouTube videos about building a brand. And they're building this brand around this kind of idea. So the question that pops in my head is if there was no way that this individual could tell anybody, would they still serve at the soup kitchen? Because I'm not sure. I'm not sure. This is the trap. When we're doing good, it's great. But when we're doing good to be seen as doing good, it does some wicked things in our heart. And that's how a lot of people, I think, treat church attendance too. I mean, I've done this. We show up on Sunday morning, we post a pic of the worship team. You know, man, it was on fire today. Some inspirational quote from the sermon, which never happens. You guys never quote me. That's fine. Just saying. You know, and then it's #blessed, #church family, right? And there's the uncomfortable question. Are we here because we genuinely want to connect with God and genuinely want to connect with our faith community? Or are we here for some sort of photo op? And maybe it's not a photo op for your friends. Maybe your photo op is for God. I'm here, God. Gave up the Panthers game. Like whatever. You're trying to look good for God, and so you come. I mean, I've lived that life. I know that it's there. You know, I've known people who never miss a Sunday, but they rarely engage in faith outside of that Sunday. Like they're present in body, but their mind is somewhere else. And they're thinking, man, this is just going to boost my good Christian image, or God's going to be pleased and happy with me. And it's like they're building some sort of spiritual personal brand, curating every image of their faithfulness without necessarily engaging in the messy, difficult, yet beautiful work of actually living out faith. If you missed last week, Joseph talked about how we can love those who hate us. If you go just do that, you have a lifetime of following Jesus just trying to figure that out. And that is messy, and that is hard. You know, and I'd rather just not deal with that. I'd rather look like that I'm a Christian. You get what I'm saying? Now, I'm not saying everybody who posts about church on social media is a hypocrite. That's not, some of you are like, delete. Sharing faith, man, it can be a beautiful thing. But when we're sharing faith for some selfish motivation, I think we need to question that, right? It's kind of the difference between, how many of you have the family, we're coming up on Christmas season, and there's always the obligatory Christmas photo standing, in front of the tree with your present, whatever. Right, the staged photo. But my wife's family, if you look at their photo, I am not lying, I wish I would have put them on screen. It is the exact same photo, standing in the exact same place, all as a family doing the exact same thing year after year after year after year. It's the difference between that staged photo and a candid photo of catching someone the moment they open something. You're like, oh my gosh. Right? That's the difference of being real and then being Instagram worthy. Right? It's a heart check. If there were no social media, if there was no one to impress, no reputation to uphold, would we still go to soup kitchens? Would we still show up at churches? These are tough questions. Here's something that I've learned, and I know, and maybe this newsflash for you, God isn't impressed by our Instagram reel. I mean, God doesn't go, wow, that's amazing. He's impressed of who you really are. He wants your reality. So, Jesus goes on. Verse 3. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. It's a great image. Give your gifts in private. And then what happens? Then your Father who sees everything will reward you. Jesus is saying, be so discreet in those good things that you do, in your generosity. Be so discreet your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. This level of privacy and humility, it goes beyond just not bragging about it on social media. He's talking about a mindset of generosity that is so ingrained in you that you just do it naturally and you don't even think about it. It's like breathing. No one ever thinks about breathing, but you breathe all the time. Just natural. Jesus said, just do that. Because if you'll give that way, if you'll be generous that way, if you'll take care of those needs in that way, then it is God who will reward you. If you do it the other way, well, you've got your reward. All those little hearts and thumbs up on your post, that's great, that's your reward. Or if you do it this way, it says that your Father in heaven sees, He will reward you. In God's economy, it's the quiet, unseen acts that carry the most weight. So it goes on. When you pray, so we're going to move from generosity, then he moves to prayer. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on the street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. You ever seen somebody praying in public? Maybe you were out, at a church thing, at a small group, whatever, and you're like, wow, man, listen to them pray. They really must be spiritual. You ever done that? I mean, I have. Like that is simply amazing. Maybe you've done it yourself. You're at a restaurant with friends and the food comes out and you're like, you have to bow your head and say this really elaborate prayer, at least long enough for everyone to notice. And praying for a meal, not bad, not saying that. But when we're more concerned, is what Jesus is saying, that people see us, then we're connecting with God, it's a problem. And hence it contributes to the performance trap, where we get so caught up in the performance of looking good that we forget about actually being good. This is what Jesus is saying. And the scary part of that is we are so good at this performance, sometimes we even fool ourselves. We post about our blessed lives, which it's great. I do that as well. We think about what goes on our social media. We get the best pictures about the best trips, You're at church and you got your hand raised and you get the camera just right to get the band in your hand, like whatever it is, right? Or we volunteer, we give to the charity, and bit by bit we start believing our own hype. Man, I'm a good person. Man, I am a spiritual person. Jesus says, let's not do that publicly. He doesn't mince words about it. So what he says is, I tell you the truth, if this is what you're doing, that's all the reward you'll ever get. Wow. Other people's credit. A few likes. A few little hearts. That's it. That's pretty direct, Jesus. It's like, hey, if you're doing something spiritual just to be seen by others, good for you. In our culture, man, we don't really stand on street corners and pray, except for the weird guy down at the Panthers game with the bullhorn. He's not really praying. He's just yelling at all of us about how we're all going to hell. But So we're not really like praying on the street corners. But have you ever told someone, hey, I'll pray for you? But you're never going to do that. I mean, you never did, right? Someone mentions something going on at work and you post into the Slack channel, thoughts and prayers. You never prayed and you never thought. That's something similar. That's what Jesus is saying. You're just doing that to look good. So, verse 6. But when you pray, so don't do it that way. But when you pray, go away by yourselves, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father where? In private. Then your Father, who sees everything, will reward you. Now, he's not saying we should never pray in public. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying the heart of our prayer life should be a private, intimate communication with God, not a performance for others. Then he moves on to another spiritual practice, fasting. And when you fast, don't make it obvious as the hypocrites do. Like Jesus is railing on the hypocrites here. For they try to look miserable and disheveled, so people will admire them for their fasting. So what would happen during their time is they would go on a fast, and they would put things to make them look gray, like ashes on their face. They would wear really kind of tattered clothes, right? They wanted to look miserable so that everybody would know, oh, they're fasting. Now, we don't really do that, but I live in a religious world where I see everybody posting about their Daniel fast. You know, we want everybody to know I'm eating Whole30 for spiritual reasons. We have to announce to everyone, hey, I'm going to take a break from Instagram. I'm going to take a break from social media for the next 30 days for spiritual reasons. I mean, it's kind of an equivalent of what we do. Jesus says, don't do this. But when you fast, comb your hair, wash your face. This, by the way, is like great advice for any middle school parents. Just send them to Matthew 6:17. By the way, comb your hair, wash your face, use deodorant. I know you don't think you do need it. Lay off the Axe body spray. So when you fast, comb your hair, wash your face. Then no one will notice that you're fasting. So Jesus is like, nobody's going to know that you're doing this except your Father, who knows what you do in, there's that word again, private. And your Father, who sees everything, will reward you. Do you see the common thread as Jesus is introducing these ideas into this? Jesus, he's revealing something very profound about how God's kingdom works versus how our world works. What Jesus is saying is in God's kingdom, what's done in secret transforms what's seen in public. What's done in secret will transform what is seen in public. If you'll spend time in private, it will change you. And then other people will see the change. When we focus on that secret without recognition, praying without an audience, serving without any social media posts, something remarkable happens. These private moments actually begin to transform us. We actually start to become something different at our core. It's changing not just how we act, but it changes who we are. This is what Jesus is saying. The best illustration I could think of this, because we're heading into the Christmas season, is this. You're going to see these in stores, right? The Christmas tree scented air freshener, right? And you those of you who have a fake tree, you're going to try to hang these up, and you're probably going to try to convince me that it smells like a real tree. It does not. We know that this smells nothing like that. So what's the difference? This is trying desperately to be like that. But a real Christmas tree is just what it is. And it smells like a Christmas tree. What Jesus is saying in all of this is, don't be an air freshener. Be a real tree. If you'll just be a real tree, you'll smell like a real tree. Thank you. We can all go home. So where do we go from here? Let me give you something practical. Here are 4 things that you can do, and if you'll put these things in practice, you will be real. Not just look real, not just try to be real, you will be real. So I'm going to give you 4 things that you can take and do in secret as we wrap up, and they're really quick. First thing you can do is do a motivation check. Before you do anything spiritual this week, I want you to do a motivation check. Whether it's praying, serving, coming to church, I just want you to pause and ask yourself a question. Why am I doing this? Good question. Be honest with yourself. And if you're doing something for the wrong reasons, don't beat yourself up. Just acknowledge that you're doing it for the wrong reason and try to refocus. And say, I need to do these things in private for a very private reason. Second thing, practice secret kindness. Jesus said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Here's something you can do this week. Everybody here can do this. Do one act of kindness or one act of generosity that absolutely no one knows about. Not your spouse, no one near you, no one knows. Except you and your Father who sees. Try it. See how it feels. See if you want to do more of that. Third thing. I need to explain this social media fast. I'm not saying you need to give up social media. Here's what I mean by social media fast. Here's the challenge for the next week. Everybody here. For this week, don't post anything about your spiritual life online. No Bible verses, no church check-ins, no great memes, nothing. Instead, use that time to journal with God, to pray with God, to let Him do something deep in your faith. Just this week. Can you do it? Fourth thing. Admit imperfection. Part of being authentic is being honest about what our struggles really are. That's who we are as a church. That's everything that's in my life. But this week, what I would challenge you, open up to a trusted friend about something you're wrestling with. Now, it doesn't have to be one of your deep, dark secrets. I'm not asking you to do that. Just something that shows that you actually are a human, that you got flaws, and you need to work on some things. Just share one thing with one person. And just see how liberating that can feel. Because it's going to give that person that you're talking to permission to do the same. And then it goes viral. So these are 4 things you can do based on what Jesus just told us. And these are upside down to our community. I get it. But Jesus says if you'll do these things, your heavenly Father will see them. And He's the one that will reward you. And as, you know, in the spirit of authenticity, if I'm standing here talking about being authentic and living a life free from his spiritual hypocrisy, I have to acknowledge, man, there have been way too many moments in my life where that's who I was too. Way too many moments in my life where I was the one performing, trying to look good. I was more concerned about looking like a follower of Jesus than being a follower of Jesus. But here's the beautiful thing about God. He doesn't want our performance. He doesn't want it. He wants us. All of us. The good, the bad, the ugly. He wants the parts that we proudly display when we get out on social media and we show everyone that's there. He wants the parts that we're trying to hide that we hope no one ever sees. He just wants it all. And when we finally let go of this act that we're putting up, we can find true freedom. Messy, absolutely. Imperfect, absolutely. But earnestly seeking Him, that is life-giving. That's when transformation begins. That's when you can begin to experience freedom and find the life that Jesus has promised. To be known by God and truly loved by God just for who you are. I want that for you so bad. I want you to experience the relief of not having to pretend, especially in front of God. The joy of being just who you are. Because in a world that's constantly telling you to be more, do more, achieve more, this is what Jesus says. You're enough. Just as you are. And that's all he wants. Come to me, those of you who are weary and needing rest, he says. You're enough. And if you're new to faith, or you're skeptical about it, I think the challenge I would give you to do this week is, instead of trying to force yourself to believe or pretend that you have faith, just be honest where you're at. And I would challenge you to pray a prayer. Something like this: God, if you're there, and I'm not sure that you're there, I'm not sure about all of this, but if you are, I'm open to finding out more. Because even if you're a skeptic and you're kind of on the fence, here's the beautiful thing. Whether you believe in God or not, living authentically, being true to yourself, dropping the act, is valuable. And I believe you just might actually meet the God that maybe you've been afraid of, or that you're not sure that is there. Because if God is real, if Jesus is who he claims to be, he can handle your doubts and he can handle your questions. In fact, I believe he welcomes them. Because an authentic relationship begins with authentic communication. So whether you're a longtime believer, whether you're new to faith or you're a skeptic, we all live in a world full of fake news, airbrushed photos, carefully curated social media profiles. You know what is truly refreshing? Authenticity. Being real. Being raw. Being honest. And a faith not built on performance, not built on pretense, but on genuine exploration and authentic experience is not just worth pursuing. It is extraordinarily life-giving. Let's all pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you now asking for your help to be the same person in public that we are in private. And God, it is not always easy in a world that tells us to put our best face forward all the time. So God, I pray that you give us the courage to be real. Whether we're at church, whether we're at work, scrolling through social media. Jesus, you know we don't always get it right. And we get pulled in trying to look good instead of being good. God, I pray that you would help us with those moments. Give us a nudge when we're tempted to fake it. Help us to choose honesty even when it's tough. Father, we need your strength to live truthfully. Remind us, I pray you just speak clearly to us, every person in this room, that you love us, the real us. Messy hair, bad moods, all bit of it. And when being authentic feels scary or uncomfortable, I pray that you give us an extra dose of bravery. Remind us in those times that the freedom of being ourselves is so much better than the exhaustion of pretending. Thank you for loving us who we really are. Jesus, I pray that you help us live out this authenticity, not just today, but every day. In Jesus' name.